Hello and welcome to my channel. Today what I'd like to talk about is how to read a story that we first learn about on social media. And before we get into my guidelines for reading a story that we first learn about on social media, I'd like to discuss what prompted the idea for this video. And that is this. About 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine on his Instagram newsfeed posted a shot of someone else, I'm not sure who is claiming that the Democrats are already trying to steal the 2020 election by engaging in massive voter fraud in the state of Pennsylvania. That early voting ballots for Trump had already been thrown out. And naturally, this piqued my interest because, of course, this is a democracy and we don't want anyone's voice to be discounted. We don't want anyone's votes to be thrown out. So I looked into it. And along the way, as I learned about the story, I thought about, what it takes in a democracy to be a responsible citizen in terms of news and information gathering, and how we can best go about doing that, particularly when we learn about a story, from social media. And so I came up with these 3 guidelines. And I'm not gonna throw in a screenshot of my friend's post because I don't want people dunking on him, because online discourse is incredibly rude and counterproductive and just plain stupid. So I'm not gonna do that. But that's my good faith explanation of his post. So the first rule of getting news from social media is not to get news from social media. Social media is a wasteland. Social media is a cesspool of disinformation and misinformation. And for the most part, from my experience anyway, and I'm sure of yours as well, is that social media news is often from, unattributed sources, uncredentialed sources, just some random people either on Facebook or Twitter or Parler or Instagram or wherever you are, just blasting off his own opinions on news stories with absolutely zero credibility. So, rule number 1, don't get your news from social media. Rule number 2, if you do come across a news story on social media, you got to look at the source. Ask yourself if it's reputable. And what I mean by a reputable source, you're going to ask yourself a few things. You're going to ask yourself, does this source have a history? Is it an establishment media? Has it been around for a long time? Does it have a history of journalistic standards? Does it have a reputation to uphold in terms of its journalistic standards? Right? You're going to want to look for that. And I'm sure that you can figure out for yourself what is and what is not a reputable source. And then for number 3, don't just find one news story and make up your mind. What you want to do is you want to search out news stories from a diverse range of reputable sources, which is what I like to do and also what I've done in the rest of this video, as we will start now. As we will start right here. So first, here is Reuters. They're reporting on this story. And you've noticed what I've done here is I've taken a screenshot because I've now recorded this video 3 times. And each time there have been multiple problems with the upload. And I believe it was because I had all the web pages open across here and they were running video and they were running all this stuff and just took up too much memory or RAM or whatever. I'm not a tech guy. And it just degraded the video content. So what I did was instead of opening up all these different web pages, I just took screenshots to share with you. But I will, however, link to all these stories below in the show notes so you can make up your own mind and you can read through them on your own. But I think it's important to read the headlines because it's going to tie into kind of my method of news and information gathering as we move forward. So here we go. This is Reuters. They report, U.S. federal prosecutor announces inquiry into discarded ballots. All right, so boom, right off the bat, we learned that there is some factual basis, at least in part, to my friend's claim. And the factual basis is that there has indeed been discarded ballots somewhere in the United States, right? And since I'm not going to read the entire story, I have made bullet points. And here's a screenshot again. And here are the bullet points that we get from this Reuters reporting. And we learned that 9 military ballots have been opened and discarded. And these are early mail-in voting. And 7 of the 9 ballots were outside of their envelopes and were all cast for President Trump. So again, right away, there's some factual basis to the claim that my friend made. We also learned in the Reuters reporting that U.S. Attorney David Fried has reported the incident and has announced that the ballots were cast for Trump. That is, he issued a memo to the media stating what had happened, who the ballots were for, and that he was opening an investigation into what happened here. We also learned in the Reuters reporting that a former justice official has criticized the decision to announce the candidate on the ballot, saying that U.S. attorneys' offices don't issue reports on pending investigations, and certainly not reports so blatantly contrived to provide political ballast for a sitting president's campaign narrative. Right, so this is the 2 major things that we learned in the Reuters reporting. We learned about the discarded ballots, and we learned that U.S. Attorney David Fried had opened up an investigation, issued a memo to the public stating that these ballots were indeed discarded and were cast for Trump. So now what I'm going to show you here is mediabiasfactcheck.com. And again, I've taken a screenshot, and I'm going to link to this webpage below. And mediabiasfactcheck.com, in my opinion, is one of the best sources that you can find on the internet for helping you evaluate the legitimacy of a news source. And what they report here, and they have a methodology that you can consult to see if it's to your liking, they find that Reuters is among the most least biased of news organizations, and their factual reporting is very high. And in my personal experiences, this is absolutely true. And what they mean by least biased is the following. These sources have minimal bias and use very few loaded words, wording that attempts to influence an audience by using appeal to emotion or stereotypes. And the reporting is factual and usually sourced. These are the most credible media sources. And again, I find this to be the case, at least in terms of Reuters. I agree mostly with mediabiasfactcheck.com. So now we go to our next story, our next story of reporting on this topic. And it's from the New York Times, my hometown paper, or at least one of them. And they report that the Justice Department discloses Pennsylvania ballot inquiry prompting fears of politicalization. Politicization. I can never pronounce that word. I'm sorry. I have an awful voice. I'm not good at it. I also have a reader's vocabulary where I'm unable to pronounce words that I know the meaning of because I'm half a moron. So that's what the New York Times reports. And again, you can read the whole thing for yourself. I encourage you to do so. Independent thinking is absolutely vital in a functioning democracy. But for those of you who don't want to read, I do have a good faith attempt to provide some of the bullet points of the reporting. And we find that 9 ballots were improperly opened in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. This confirms what we read in the Reuters reporting. We also learned of Fried's announcement of the opening of the case and the inquiry into the case, which we also learned about in the Reuters reporting. Now, the third point from the New York Times reporting is something that Reuters did not report, and that's the following. We also learned that there was a potential reason why these ballots were opened in the first place. And what that reason was, as we will find in further reporting on the matter from other sources, is that the envelopes used for overseas military and absentee voting ballot requests, those envelopes are similar to the envelopes used for mail-in voting, early mail-in voting, right? And so what happened here was the people in the locality of Luzerne County, they had confused the two envelopes and mistakenly opened the mail-in ballots that they mistaked for the ballot requests. So it was a legitimate mistake. They made a mistake in doing it, and then they discarded the mail-in ballots because according to the state law, you cannot open mail-in ballots until election day. Right. So we also learned in the New York Times reporting of a Justice Department policy contrary to Fried's decision to announce the candidate associated with the ballots. And that is, election experts said the announcement was highly irregular. Justice Department policy calls for keeping voter fraud investigations under wraps to avoid affecting the election outcome. And the experts said it was almost unheard of for the department to provide an update of the case and disclose the name of the candidate for whom the ballots had been cast. And this is indeed the case. If you follow the link here, which again I will provide down in the show notes, you will find the Justice Department memo with this policy of not announcing the voter fraud cases, the names on the ballots in voter fraud cases, right? And so now we go to mediabiasfactcheck.com for the New York Times, and indeed they find, which I think is accurate, they have a left to left of center bias with a high factual reporting. And this is interesting because I think that when we compare Reuters to the New York Times, we see that mediabiasfactcheck.com is indeed on the money. Let's look, and to prove that point, let's look at the headlines from both these sources. New York Times. Look at the headline here. They don't just say that the Justice Department is looking into this issue, but that it's prompting fears of politicalization, right? So right away, the New York Times is framing it from a left liberal perspective, because as we know right now, there's this great debate in the United States of America as to whether or not increased mail-in voting as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic will, as Donald Trump and the Republicans like to claim, lead to massive voter fraud, or as the Democrats, the left wing, and people who read objective news reporting will say, there's really no evidence of this happening, right? So the New York Times is through their headline, giving the kind of leftist liberal bias. Whereas Reuters, if we look at them, it's just a simple headline. Just the facts, ma'am. U.S. federal prosecutor announces inquiry into discarded ballots. They're not trying to sway you either way. They're just trying to show you what the facts are. So I just think that's worth noting here, is that when we're on media bias fact check, or when we're on really any website, any news source, we're going to want to gauge two things. We're going to want to gauge, on the one hand, any bias that may be involved, and on the other hand, whether the factual reporting is high or low, right? Because you can certainly contemplate an instance where there will be heavy bias, whether to the right or to the left, but the factual basis will still be there. It will still be factually accurate, but with a biased presentation of those facts, right? We can see that. So you're either going to have right or left bias, or factual or very low factual reporting. Speaking of factual reporting, we move to Fox News' reporting on this issue. DOJ, Department of Justice, orders Pennsylvania County to change ballot practices after troubling findings. Right. So again, the Fox News reporting will be linked to down below. Feel free, if you like, to go ahead and read it yourself. What we learn here we learn more about the 9 ballots that have been reported in the previous reports on this topic. We learn about Freed's inquiry in the letter and that they're opened. But we see like an emphasis on the troubling nature of this incident, and this is in keeping with a more right-wing bias. We also learn here that the locality is trying to reconstitute the ballots so that they can be counted in the election, at least according to Freed's letters. I think this is very important. This is something that I didn't read in any of the other reporting, that they're trying to rehabilitate, they're trying to reconstitute the ballots, which, as I said before in the opening of this, is absolutely necessary. Of course, we want everyone's vote to be counted, even if they are for Donald Trump, which is a mistake. You should not do that. Right? But we want those to be counted. We live in a democracy, and it's only fair that there should be counted. They shouldn't be discounted simply from a mistaken local election official having mistakenly opened them. We also learn here that there's further reporting on exactly why the ballots were opened in the first place. Quote, "It was explained to investigators the envelopes used for official overseas, military, absentee, and mail-in ballot requests are so similar that the staff believed that adhering to the protocol of preserving envelopes unopened would cause them to miss such ballot requests. Our interviews further revealed that this issue was a problem in the primary election, therefore a known issue, and that the problem had not been corrected." So again, now we're kind of building on our knowledge base by looking at a diverse source of reporting on this issue. And we learn, as we did before, that it was a genuine, innocent mistake that these ballots were opened, and that, in fact, this had happened during the primary election. So this is known. They should have fixed this, but they haven't. So maybe the Justice Department opening up an investigation into them will help them get it cleared up before the election, which, it's already underway. Obviously, these ballots have been open. And again, this is a travesty. I hope they're reconstituted. I hope they're rehabilitated so they can be counted. Fox News, according to MediaBiasFactCheck.com, is right-wing bias with mixed factual reporting. And I think this is true. I think this is an accurate assessment of Fox News. I read Fox News regularly. Don't tend to watch cable news because cable news is even worse than social media, particularly this source. So I stay away from it. So yeah, but again, you want a diverse range of sources to help you make up your mind as to the veracity of these claims that you're going to find on social media. So, even read something like Fox News, Washington Times, stuff like that. That's more right-leaning. National Review. The next source is the Washington Post, and their headline reads, "Justice Department Statement on Mail-in Ballot Investigation Appalls Election Law Experts." So what we learn here, it leads with political reaction to this story, then reports on what happened. So for me, as I was reading this Washington Post article, it was very biased in its reporting, using a lot of loaded words, as I'll show you momentarily. There's more emphasis in the story on the election law experts' negative reaction to Freed's letter, right? Because according to MediaFactCheck.com, MediaBiasFactCheck.com, Washington Post is left of center bias with high factual reporting. I find this to be true. So I subscribe to, I'm a news junkie. I subscribe to a lot of different periodicals and magazines. I have The Economist, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, New York Review of Books, N+1, The Nation, National Review. so on and so forth, because I believe in getting a diverse range of news and information and analysis. And my reading of the Washington Post over the course of the past 4 years it's been clear to me that since the election of Donald Trump, they've skewed very much in the anti-Trump direction in the terms of the presentation of the facts, right? They're going to use a lot of loaded words. They're going to go hard after Trump. So when you're reading the Washington Post, just keep that in mind. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to persuade you to a point of view by activating your emotions with how they report on this subject. And just to give you an example, we go to this story. Look at the lead paragraph. The Justice Department alarmed voting law experts Thursday by announcing an investigation into 9 discarded ballots found in northeastern Pennsylvania, a case immediately seized upon by the Trump campaign as evidence of a dark Democratic conspiracy to tamper with the presidential election. You just see a lot of emotionally loaded words in the Washington Post reporting. So, again, it's not factually inaccurate, anything that they reported here and how they wrote it, but the presentation of it is loaded, it is biased, it's anti-Trump, and it's got a center left to left wing bias in it. Okay, the next reporting was from The Hill. And The Hill says 7 military ballots cast for Trump found discarded in Pennsylvania. What we find here is that we get the reporting on the discarded ballots, we get reporting on Fried's letter and his opening of the investigation, and the only new piece of information that I got from this was that originally the Department of Justice reported that 9 ballots were cast for Trump, and then they later revised that to 7. So I don't know who the other 2 were for. Presumably Biden, maybe Jorgensen, who knows, the Libertarian. There's no telling. And The Hill, according to MediaBiasFactCheck.com, is mostly factual and least biased. When I'm reading, I tend to like anything that's mostly factual to very high. Anything below, I tend to avoid, although I will read Fox News just to see what the conservatives and whatnot are talking about. Okay, this final one is from NPR, and they say, Feds, in unusual statement, announced they're investigating a few discarded ballots. And what we learned from this reporting is that, it starts with the investigation of the opening of the ballots. It reports on election law experts and the former Justice Department officials' characterization of the letter as unusual in its announcement of the canon of the ballots. This is nothing new. It's been reported even in Fox News. This is important, though, that in NPR, they report that the Luzerne County Elections Director immediately reported the problem upon its discovery. And that's very good. I like to read that because you want probity, you want honesty, and the people that are tasked with making sure that our elections run smoothly. So that's very good. I like to see this. And again, I hope that as a result of the reporting and the Justice Department's investigation, that these instances will not happen moving forward, number one, and will also, those 9 ballots will be reconstituted so their voice will be tallied in the final vote count. There's also more reporting on why the ballots were open. We already know what the issue was there. There was nothing nefarious about this. It was just an honest mistake by the local election officials. And I should say that I read in one of the reports, I forget which one, that I believe this county actually went 20 points in favor of Trump. So it doesn't strike me as, although Obama did win it when he was running, but a 20-point favorite for Trump, it doesn't strike me as realistic that they would want to discard Trump ballots, right? Like, clearly this county supports him. Right. And NPR, according to MediaBiasFactCheck.com, is center-left, left bias, and the factual reporting is very high. And I think that's accurate. I read NPR from time to time. A little dry, so that's not really my favorite. I like the aforementioned ones that I have a subscription to. So, again, I think what happened here was my friend had found this post and he just took a screenshot and posted it on his own Instagram. And he must have felt, he must have liked it because it confirmed his priors, right? Like he's a right winger, so he automatically assumed that there is rampant voter fraud, even though there's no evidence that we know of indicating that that's true. And so it confirmed what he already thought, so he shared it. But I don't think he should have, because it turns out if he would have looked at these news sources, he would have found out that what really happened was that it was just an honest mistake, and that they're hopefully going to be reconstituted, and that there was no nefarious effort by Democrats to steal the 2020 election, which you would have learned, again, if you would have followed these 3 guidelines for reading news that you first learn about on social media. Number 1, don't get your news from social media. Social media and cable news are just awful places to do your news and information gathering. They are designed specifically to agitate the mind, to just hype you up with emotion and get you angry, right? And then when you're angry, and you're emotional, you're not in a good spot to reflect on things, right? That's why I prefer to do reading of newspapers for news and information gathering. Reading is a more contemplative, sober activity. So you can use logic and reason when you're doing your news and information gatherings, rather than being agitated about these nefarious political actors trying to ruin your country or whatever. So rule number 2: if you are going to read news on social media, ask yourself if it's a reputable source. If it's not, be skeptical towards it. Skeptical. And if it is a reputable source, still be skeptical, but do rule number 3, which is search out news stories from a diverse range of reputable sources. And I think if you do that with news stories that you find on social media, you'll come to a better understanding, a more holistic view of the news story itself, and it will help you become a better citizen. This is very important for news and information gatherings, particularly when you live in an open, liberal, democratic society such as us, where you, the citizen, are essentially in control of the government. We, the people, right? So we need to inform ourselves. We need to shy away from very emotional, garbage that we read in social media and cable news. We want to reflect calmly. We want to get to the facts as surely and as certainly as we can by sampling a wide, diverse range of sources, and then coming to our own conclusions and taking that to the ballot box with us whenever it's time to vote in local or national elections. And with that, I'm going to leave you. I hope you learned a lot or learned anything. And if you did, please consider giving this video a like and sharing it with your friends. And thank you very much. Have a good day. Take care of yourselves and of others.